Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about guidance for VDI workloads with Technical Solutions Specialist Elise Schaefer. Welcome, Elise.
Hi, thank you for having me, Darren. Appreciate you bringing me in.
I'm glad you came in. You've done a lot of work around virtual desktop infrastructure and their workloads. You've helped me out with some of my accounts, specifically going over, how to size their VDI workloads. So welcome, Elise. We really need your help a lot right now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for calling on me and having the ability to help. It's been quite interesting. So, like the problems that people are coming to me, just like you come to me about your account, are people are either in their journey of starting to look at VDI because of the COVID-19 situation, or they're looking to grow their licenses, their infrastructure. And to that end, it's not just adding more licenses, it's understanding what you have today in terms of infrastructure and what the right infrastructure is. So, again, licenses, while getting more is good for those people that are at home and they can become more into your workforce, come back into your workforce more. But if you don't have the hardware that runs it holistically, that's a problem. And most customers, when they built their VDI in the beginning anyway, or that's been running for a while, they already built with the most amount of users per hypervisor or per node, however you want to call it. Already that's what it's been doing. So now that they have more people at home trying to work, or remote workers, licenses alone won't solve all that problem.
We found that some of our customers, because they bought more licenses, but it's so slow that, they know they need more hardware, but they have to wait. They've gone on shifts, even working from home. So there's some temporary solutions that people are using, like staggering when they can use their VDI solution for different users, but that's very short term. So ultimately, we've got to find better solutions for them with hardware, right?
Well, yeah, so the hardware has to grow and they have to get the hardware to grow if they're going to maintain this. And like right now we're in the maintain, but then we're going to have a buffer where we're going to be able to all go back to work for a period of time, whether we go back in tiny phases or we go back all at once. That's yet to be seen. And to that end, we're hearing that this virus is going to different strain out in the fall, where we're going to frankly be back to where we're at today, which is a shelter in place, because the numbers are going to rise again, and we still don't have that antibody or that vaccine available just yet.
Well,
learning lots, but we're not there.
Yeah, let's hope that that's not the case, but we need to plan for it as an IT organization for sure, right?
Exactly. Plan for the worst, hope for the best, right?
Right.
To that end, we have some understandings that we've done ourselves. We have done testing, some extensive testing ourselves with VDI and the enterprise equipment on the back end that runs it and how it runs well as looking at some of our customers who have done this with us and our partners. So some of the things that you need to know is that VDI is extremely CPU intensive. It is a ratio of cores to gigahertz, more gigahertz hungry than core hungry, but you can run out pretty quickly. What I mean by that is if you look at your low memory profile or your task worker, or what some people call a standard workload profile, those are the ones that are your help desk users, your initial nurse lines, the people who are using maybe some Office applications and a couple Chrome sessions. They use less than 8 gig of memory in those profiles. Those profiles are extremely gigahertz intensive. The larger memory profile is those that are, they're called high memory profile. They're your CAD users, your design, your animation people who are delivering animation and creating and editing movies. That would be another use case for VDI. Those are using high memory profiles. And, to that point, I've been asked, how does that work with terms of CPU? So CPU in and of itself is all memory intensive within VDI. The lower profiles, you will run out of CPU gigahertz and CPU cores. You'll run out of those before you even touch about less than 600 gig of memory. Like, that'll be the most you'll ever get on a server because you've run out of CPU and your CPU crashes
So,
when you
so in
have a
that
low
case,
profile.
the gigahertz and the number of cores ends up being your bottleneck, right? Or
They
your
do.
constraint,
The
right?
CPU ends up, yes, yeah, CPU ends up crushing you at that point.
So it sounds
It's
to me
not
like,
about touching all the memory.
right, it sounds to me like you really need to know the workloads that you are running on your VDI session. You can't just throw them out there and just say, all right, everyone do whatever you want. You have to have some kind of profile.
You do have to know a profile. You need to know how much memory, you need to know how much gigahertz each one uses in cores. So when you create a VDI session, literally you ask for memory and CPU, but you need to understand the gigahertz behind it. Just know that you doing Chrome sessions is very gigahertz intensive. Office is gigahertz intensive. When you use higher memory applications, CAD, OpenGSL, some animation, editing for streams, that is going to use more memory, and your memory is going to be taxed more than being in a lower profile. Not just because of the size of the memory, but just because of the workload in and of itself. That application uses more memory calls. And that's where you're going to get more the ability to grow your memory, a terabyte, 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, and beyond, and actually use it. So, like for a low profile or standard or task worker, if you put a terabyte of memory in, frankly, you can put it in the server, but you won't touch past 768 or 786, 576 gig of memory. Like, you won't even hit that. The CPU will crash. But when you're doing a higher memory profile workload application, say you've got 50 Chrome sessions, because apparently there are people that do that, and there are,
Yep.
not me, because I know that takes up memory on my
No,
machine
you
and
do.
that's going to
Yep.
slow me down.
Yep.
But there are people that do that. But if you're going to use CAD, you're going to use animation software, that type of thing, you want to use a GPU. But if you are using a high memory profile, in all honesty, anything 10, 12, 16 gig or more, start with a terabyte of memory in your system, and you'll utilize that plus that memory, that 1 terabyte plus. As your memory profile expands, so does your memory on your server, so that you're using things in a balanced manner. So, we've talked about the GPU being CAD, animation, some ERIC systems, default systems. You need to know that those applications use GPU, so you do need to know the workload. You do need to understand the profiles. Um, to that point, the other thing to consider is, if you're a large enough business, some businesses have the cluster that's just for the help desk, and there's other clusters that are for just the CAD or the engineering platform users, and there's other users for doing, specific things. If you're one of those customers, that's awesome. But if you're one of those customers where everybody gets to use the same servers, the same data center in the back end, you want to size appropriately for that. So you need to understand, again, what the workload is and the mixes, so that we are able to size appropriately what that memory ought to be, what that CPU ought to be, and doesn't need a GPU. So, for instance, your help desk users, your office users, GPU really isn't needed. I mean, it's an added cost. It's not going to get you that many more users. So
It
what
would actually
makes
be
the
better
most
to
sense?
maybe buy another server instead of adding more GPUs if you have a bunch of task workers, for example, right?
Because overall you'll get more users in a server than one GPU can handle in a system. So you might add
Gotcha.
5 more users at the cost of $2,000 per GPU card, or I can take and invest it in a server and add in another 200 users to
Gotcha.
300 users, depending again on that low memory profile.
All right, so we talked about understanding your different profiles and all that stuff. So, what kind of guidance do you have for us? What I've already categorized all my people into task workers or higher memory workers or GPU graphics intense. What do I do now, Elise?
If you're the type of customer that needs to put the most amount of users on every single hypervisor, every single node, then you want to go with the 6258R, Intel 6258R dual socket, 2.7 gigahertz, 28 cores. It gets you the ability to do the most and lower your TCO overall. Now, if you're a customer who likes to have lower risk mitigation, number of users on or number of VDI sessions on a hypervisor, a 24 core 3 gigahertz will also do pretty well. But you're not going to get as many users as the 6258R. Just understand that there's a risk mitigation there and why you would do that. The other thing to think about, again, always 2 sockets, because again, the CPU gigahertz is where you're going to run out of first before you even touch memory, especially in a lower profile of a workload. To the point where I mentioned before, 576 gig of memory is the most you'll ever use if you have a single cluster that's all low memory. That means 8 gig or less of memory. And when you're talking 8 gig or less, 8 gig is where you start. Honestly, when you're using Windows 10 users, if you're that type of customer that still has Windows 7 users, there are some out there. There's more than what we think. There are out there, they use a lower memory profile. So you won't, putting a terabyte of memory in a system, really, you can do it, but it's not worth it because you're not touching that. That's called dust bunnies, and I don't believe in dust bunnies. 512 gig is where I would stay if you're a user, to be honest with you, to make the balance of CPU, gigahertz, and memory. You'll get the most out of it, and you won't have anything left to dust bunnies, collecting dust bunnies on a low task user, standard user, low profile.
Now, that's just
When
for users that are like task workers, right? But what if I do have Windows 8, or I mean Windows 10? And what if I am more generating assets with Word and all that stuff? Then I'm a higher memory profile more than likely, right?
So if you're more of what we call a power user, knowledge user with Office applications, not just Microsoft Office or Office 365, and you're using Chrome or using Mozilla or maybe using IE Explorer if you want to do that, and you're using the regular applications, off-the-shelf enterprise applications on your VDI session, those that are 8, 10, 12, 16 gig in memory, you want to start no less than a terabyte of memory. DDR and mix with PMEM. So you can take those users that are 12 gig, 16 gig, and add in a mixture of PMEM and DDR to get a better TCO and continue to have the user count and not have a bottleneck at the VDI session. But again, you want to start at 1 terabyte when you have that type of user and move upward. You don't want to do a 512. That'll be your bottleneck in memory and when you have a high profile user.
Now, you kind of mentioned just a little bit about our DCPMM memory. That's
Mhm.
our data center persistent memory. Our Optane media is now put into DDR4 format. That decreases your cost dramatically. And I can load up a machine, a 2-socket machine with 3 terabytes, and even the higher end SKUs can go up to 6 terabytes. So that could decrease your total cost of ownership, right?
It can. So yes, it can. And so a 2U can go up to 6 terabytes. You won't use 6 terabytes when doing VDI. To be honest with you, you'll again run out of CPU before you even get to 3 terabytes. So between 1 and 3 terabytes on a 2U server with the higher CPU, the 6258R, you'll do well.
So sometimes you mentioned before, I have graphics intense applications, right? Those CAD packages, manufacturing packages, anything that's highly graphical. That's where GPUs are needed, correct?
Correct. 100%. Those will offload from the CPU, so you'll have more gigahertz and memory, gigahertz and cores back to, mostly gigahertz, back to your user count, and allow you to have more users on a hypervisor when you have those higher intensive graphic needs.
All right, great. Now, there's also another issue that you have to deal with, which you brought to light for me, which I didn't really understand, and that's boot storms. Can you explain that a little bit?
Everybody's starting at 8 a.m. in the morning to pick the time zone, turn the machine on, whoosh, and all the requests to the disks from the CPU to the memory to the disk tries to flood back to the user. So you have two things that go into the magic boot storm, especially for users that are remote versus at an office layer. One is networking, understanding the networking that is at the core and getting into the core, down to the actual hypervisor, ensuring that bandwidth as well, but also from the I/O, from the disk back to your memory to the CPU. Now, the Optane drive that we have, the P4800 drive, the beauty about this drive is it can read and write at the same time. And what that means is the fact that as somebody is trying to write files down at 8 a.m., they're temporary files, and the other user's trying to load their profile in and pull, it can be done simultaneously. The NVMe drives that are out there, while they're awesome drives and they are fast, don't get me wrong, they are a read or a write. They're not a simultaneous drive,
So
such like our 3D XPoint Optane is.
yeah, they don't have parity in the way that they read. Writes are a lot slower than reads. So with these new
Correct.
drives, you'll see a huge performance improvement on your boots.
Yes, so long as your networking is fine on out to the data out of your data center, from the core outward, you'll be 100% go. You know, you've already been doing, for those customers already have been doing VDI. They already know that their network internal to the data center is good. They just need to make sure they have the bandwidth out, as well as, you know, a VPN or some kind of security to make sure that it's not any Joe Schmo trying to grab your VDI and trying to get into your data center.
Great. Elise, this has been great information. For any of you that are listening to the podcast, you can find out more information on our website, embracingdigital.com. And thank you, Elise, very much. This has been very informative. And I can't wait to have you on again for other things.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Be safe, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and embrace the digital revolution.